My parents put their mortgage in my name without telling me, then tried to force me to pay for a house I never agreed to own. I still remember the moment I opened that first letter. It was from a bank I had never dealt with. At first, I thought it was a scam. But then I saw my full legal name, my date of birth, and a mortgage account number tied to a property I had never heard of. My stomach dropped. I called my parents immediately. My mom answered like everything was normal, like I was calling about dinner plans. When I asked her why I was receiving mortgage statements, there was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, that, we were going to tell you." That sentence changed everything. Within minutes, I learned I was somehow listed as the primary borrower on a house I had never seen, a house I didn't choose, a loan I never signed for knowingly, or so I thought. And worse, my parents were already living in it. I'm the oldest child. I've always been the responsible one, the one they trusted with bills, forms, translations, anything involving paperwork. I never imagined that trust would be used like this. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, identity mix-up, clerical error, something fixable. But then my dad called me back, calm as ever, and said, "We needed your credit. Ours wasn't good enough. It was just a technicality. You weren't supposed to worry about it." A technicality. That was their explanation for putting a six-figure debt in my name. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. But what shocked me even more was how casual they were about it, like it was normal, like I was overreacting. I demanded documents, signatures, anything. My mom said they handled everything online, that I had clicked something months ago when I helped her fill out housing paperwork on her laptop. She said I probably forgot. But I didn't forget. I remember every document I signed, especially anything financial. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking there had to be a misunderstanding. But the next morning I went to the bank in person. That's when the real nightmare started. The banker pulled up my file and looked at me strangely. She asked if I had authorized my parents to act as co-applicants. I said no. She frowned and said the mortgage had been approved with full digital consent, including ID verification. Then she said something that made my skin go cold. There was a video verification session completed. I didn't do any video verification. I asked to see the records, but she said I'd need a formal fraud investigation. And that until then, I was legally responsible for the loan. Legally responsible. I walked out shaking. My parents called me 3 times before I even reached my car. I finally answered. My dad sounded irritated now, like I was causing trouble. He said, "Don't make this bigger than it is. The house is in the family. You're just helping us stabilize things." Helping, that word stuck with me, because I wasn't helping. I was trapped. Over the next few days, I started digging. I pulled my credit report. That's when I saw it clearly listed. A mortgage account opened 8 months earlier. Payment history perfect. My name everywhere. And then I saw something that didn't make sense. The contact phone number on the account wasn't mine. It was my father's. The email tied to it was an old family email we used years ago for shared accounts, which meant this wasn't random fraud. This was coordinated. I went back to my parents' house without telling them I was coming. When I arrived, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The house wasn't new. It was older, recently renovated, but there were construction receipts still on the counter. One of them was from a contractor I recognized, a cousin of my mother's side. That was my first real clue that this wasn't just financial manipulation. It was planned. My mom greeted me like nothing was wrong. She even made coffee. I didn't sit down. I asked her directly, "Did you forge my identity?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she said, "We did what we had to do to keep the house." That sentence hit me harder than anything else. I asked her what she meant by "had to do." That's when my dad walked in and told me to sit down. For the first time, he didn't look calm. He looked tired, not guilty exactly, more like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. He told me the truth in pieces. They had been rejected for mortgages multiple times. Their credit was damaged after years of unpaid loans and business failures I didn't fully know about. They were going to lose everything. Then he said something I didn't expect. "We didn't plan to use your identity at first. We just needed a guarantor." But that wasn't what happened. Somewhere along the line, guarantor became borrower. I asked him who actually signed the final documents. He hesitated. Then he said, "You did." I laughed. I actually laughed because it sounded insane. But he wasn't smiling. He pulled out a folder. Inside were printouts of electronic forms, my name, my ID number, my digital signature. It looked real, too real, but I still knew something was wrong. I had never seen these documents before. I asked for proof of the video verification the bank mentioned. My mom looked away when I said that. That was the moment I realized there was something deeper going on. I left without finishing the conversation. That night, I contacted a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Daniel. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He said cases like this were rare but not impossible, especially when family members had access to personal data. He also said something that made my stomach twist. If they used AI-based identity verification or recorded footage manipulation, we're dealing with a different level of fraud. That was the first time I considered that technology might be involved. Over the next week, I became obsessed with finding inconsistencies. I requested the full mortgage audit. I checked timestamps. I compared login locations. That's when I noticed something strange. The video verification was logged at 2:13 a.m. I was asleep at that time. I checked my phone records, no activity, but the login location was my city. And then I found something even worse. There were multiple login attempts on my account that didn't trigger alerts because they came from a trusted device. My father's tablet, the same tablet I had used months earlier to help him set up banking apps. That's when everything started connecting in a way I didn't want it to. They hadn't just used my identity once. They had been building access over time, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. When I confronted them again, I didn't tell them everything I knew. I just said I wanted to see the house documents again. My dad hesitated, then agreed. But when I arrived, I noticed something new. There were guests in the house, not family, two men I had never seen before. They introduced themselves as investors. That word made no sense. My parents had told me this was a family home, not an investment property. One of the men looked at me and said, "You're the co-owner, right? We've been waiting to finalize your signature for the equity transfer." My heart stopped. Equity transfer. I turned to my dad. He looked cornered now. That's when everything collapsed into truth. The house wasn't just a home. It was part of a leveraged investment deal my parents had entered into years ago. When their finances fell apart, they used the property as collateral in multiple overlapping agreements. And when they ran out of legal options, they used me, not just to qualify for the mortgage, but to protect the entire structure from foreclosure. If the loan defaulted under their names, everything would crash immediately. But under mine, they had more time, more breathing room, more lies. I asked them if they understood what this meant for me. My mom finally broke. She said, "We were going to fix it before you ever had to deal with it. We just needed time." Time, that word again, but what they really meant was delay consequences, delay collapse, delay truth. The investors weren't patient. One of them slid a paper toward me. It showed missed payments, 3 months behind, and a notice of potential legal action if the account wasn't stabilized. In my name, I felt sick. I turned to leave, but the investor said something that froze me. "We already ran background on you. You have assets. You can absorb this." Assets. I had no assets. Then I realized what they meant. My salary, my savings, my future credit, my life. They weren't just targeting my parents anymore. They were targeting me. That night I stayed in a hotel and didn't sleep. Everything felt unreal, like I had been dropped into someone else's financial collapse. The next morning, Daniel called me. He said something had changed. The mortgage company had flagged internal discrepancies. Specifically, the video verification file had been re-rendered. That word hit me like a punch. Re-rendered, not recorded, not stored, rendered like digital manipulation. He told me there was a chance the verification video was artificially generated using my old online footage, social media, old recordings, data scraping. My parents didn't just use access. They may have used synthetic identity tools. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was just betrayal and started realizing it might be something more calculated, something systemic. We filed the fraud report. Within days, the bank froze the account, and that's when my parents called me again. But this time, they didn't sound angry. They sounded scared. My dad said, "They're going to come after us. You need to undo this." Undo this, as if I created it. I told him I wasn't protecting them anymore. Silence followed. Then my mom whispered something I will never forget. "We didn't think they would notice the digital trail." That was the final piece. They had assumed it would blend in, that systems wouldn't catch up. That identity could be stretched without breaking, but it did break, and I was the fracture point. The investigation took weeks, then months. Eventually, the bank confirmed irregularities in the verification process. The mortgage was placed under dispute review. Liability was suspended pending legal outcome, but the emotional damage didn't pause with it. My parents stopped calling, not because they were angry, but because they were preparing for what came next, legal consequences. I didn't feel relief, not really, because even though I was no longer financially trapped, something worse remained. The realization that my entire family saw me not as a person, but as an asset, a backup plan, a signature they could overwrite when needed. A year later, I still get occasional notices from lawyers. The case is technically unresolved, and sometimes I think about that house, the one I never agreed to own, the one built on my name without my consent. And the worst part isn't the debt. It's the question that still haunts me. If they could do it once, how long had they been preparing before I ever found out?